Hi everyone, it's Ayrton here, and welcome to another episode of Grassroots Racer. First up, as yesterday was Father's Day, I want to honor all the dads, uncles, and grandfathers out there who have inspired, supported, and sacrificed for their sons and daughters to be involved in motorsport and spark their passion. Often on the show, my guests will talk about how they are involved in motorsports, and many will tell me about how their fathers, uncles, and grandfathers have inspired them. So, this week's episode is a collection of some of those stories or comments that people have shared with me as a tribute to say thanks. My own motorsport journey wouldn't be possible without my dad, and I feel super lucky to have someone, who's let me follow my passion, taught me a lot about working on my own cars, and I appreciate all the sacrifices he's had to make so I can even go racing. When he's no, okay. Restart that last bit. My own motorsport journey wouldn't be possible without my dad, and I feel lucky to have someone supporting me who has let me follow my passion, has taught me a lot about working on my karts and cars, and I appreciate all the sacrifices he makes so I can go racing, even when he struggles with his health. He's driven me to the other side of the state to race and supported me doing this podcast and to follow my dreams. Motorsport has created a lot of strong bonds between kids and their dads, and I feel super fortunate to be one of them kids. So I hope you all enjoy the show tonight, and thanks to the past guests who have shared their motorsport stories with me. And thank you, Dad, so much. And you probably won't see it at the end of this, but remember, guys, if you're racing, drive fast and take chances. Safely, of course.
To have you on the Grassroots Racer today. I'm really thrilled to speak to you today, Clay. And firstly, let's head into where it all began. So where'd you get the bug to become a race car driver?
Yeah, look, I've always had, as you know, growing up around motor racing with dad and grandpa, I've always had that interest of going motor racing or racing a car. So I think ever since I could remember, I always had little model cars of either dad or grandpa. So and I was always making my own little tracks at home. So it was really inevitable. Really, I was going to continue the family tradition, as they say.
Well, so you are a third generation of drivers. So, your family has been involved in motorsport for a long time. So, how does it feel almost to, follow in the legendary footsteps of your father and your grandfather?
Yeah, well, I'm very proud of what they have achieved, especially at Bathurst. But at the same time, yeah, a lot of people might have some expectations because I'm the third generation. But look, to be honest, I'm just taking it one race at a time and learning as I go. I'm only just at the start of my racing career, so yeah, at the moment I'm just enjoying my racing for what it is and just having fun along the way.
My first question is, are you a first generation racer, or has your family been involved in racing as you were growing up?
I'm second generation. My dad started racing well before I was born. He started off in a Mini Cooper S, racing. He was racing against Dick Johnson, Peter Brock, the Gagan brothers, and all that. He did a couple of rounds at Wanneroo, and then we helped build the cat racing car over here in WA. So he was a co-driver for that before they got bought out.
Yeah, that's really cool. And you said you guys were involved in helping build that. So I guess that's where you got the spark for racing. So when you started, did you start in karting or motorbikes or something like that?
No, I just dibbled and dabbled, drove dad's cars around a little bit here and there, pit crewed for him and his best friend that had the cat racing car. And then started doing time attack series in my GC8 WRX I've got. And then saw a couple of guys I know that were doing drifting, and we thought, yeah, let's give that a go.
So let's chat about how did you get into motorsport?
Well, I'm a middle child of two brothers, but my father was a competitor and he used to import go-karts. And so I pretty much spent my life at the go-kart track growing up around Australia. My older brother is 11 years older than me. So by the time he was right into it, I was born. I was actually nearly born at Oran Park Raceway. My mother's borders actually broke there. So it was give or take trying to get back.
Well, I want to stay at the track? Do I want to go to the hospital?
Right.
So take us back to when you were 11 years old and tell us about the time you helped your dad bleed the brakes.
Yeah, well, it was many years ago, but I was 11 and Dad had an Austin Healey Sprite and he was preparing it for a hill climb event that was coming up. And whilst I was helping him, I realized that if I'm helping bleed the brakes by pushing the brake pedal in every time he says to, then I can reach the pedal. And so I decided it was time to cash in on a promise he made that was when my feet could reach the pedals, he'd teach me how to drive it.
But to start off the episode, let's talk about your passion for motorsport. So where did it all begin?
My passion for motorsport started when I was a very young lad. I used to go and watch my dad race mini sports sedans. He raced for many years, as well, from before I was born through into the 90s. It was one of those things where I was at the track. I was basically that kid who skips rocks in the dam at Oran Park, slid down the grass hill on cardboard, and slid under the fence at the motocross track at Amaru Park. They were just my childhood days. Were unreal. Spent at the racetrack, and that was my passion. I sort of evolved from there, and I can only blame my old man, I guess, from the passion of motorsport.
Very cool that your dad used to race. And you said he used to race sedans, so that's really cool. Did he do much? Did he do many races? Like you said, he raced for a long period of time, but did he do many national or international events?
I wouldn't say international events. He did the James Hardy 12 hour in 1992, I think it was, in a GDI Swift, where they won their class with Mark Brame and did really well, actually. With the mini sports sedan, he raced many different, I guess, versions of the mini sports sedan, ended up racing the Crossflow, cars. But yeah, look, he didn't go too far. We've always been limited on money, which is pretty much where every family or every race driver here, especially here in Australia and around the world, sort of hit a brick wall. I would love to go and race sports sedans or V8 supercars or Formula 3 or anything like that, but it's at that point of can you afford it? Can you afford the rest of your life? Housing prices are really, really expensive. And it's one of those things where when you're a kid growing up, you don't realize how much money your parents put into your sporting, or whether it's motor racing or soccer or anything, or with my kids BMX racing as well. It's you don't realize how much actual money comes out of their pocket and they actually put into your competitive sport. And it didn't gel with me until I was older, where I realized how much effort my father put in and mother put into my racing.
Yeah, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize that my parents do a lot for me. Because as I was younger, it was sort of hard to realize. But yeah, racing's really expensive. So people like me who just want to race, I got to learn that it is quite expensive. But to start off, what inspired you to start racing, and what did you start out racing when you were younger?
I just always loved anything with the motor from when I was probably 3.5 years old. So I remember just riding on the handlebars of my dad's bike as soon as I could hold on. And then after that, I got into dirt biking or motocross. When I was 4 years old, I started riding. And then I kind of carried that to karting when I was about 10 and a half, 11 years old. And then I karted for a few years, did Super Nats. And then after that, I moved to Spec Miata, where I ran. It was just me and my dad. We drove all over the state and did Teen Miles the Challenge and everything like that. And so that was really fun. And then after Spec Miata, I went to MX5 Cup. And that same year, I ran a couple races in TCA and World Challenge, which is now called SRO America. And after I went from TC to TCR, and I ran a Honda, I ran a Volkswagen, then now I'm running for Hyundai. That's when I moved over to IMSA for the last few years.
So what made you interested in motorsport and wanting to take photos of race cars?
So it all started when I was a kid. My dad loves Alfa Romeos and always had Alfa Romeos. And our family always watched Formula One and MotoGP. He actually took me to the MotoGP when I was in grade 5, and that was my first exposure to motorsport, and I really loved it. And yeah, and as I grew older and learnt to drive, then I got my first car was an Alpha, and yeah, got involved in the Alpha Club. And
So, firstly, how did you get involved in motorsport?
My family was involved in motorsport through dirt track speedway, so a little bit different to circuit racing, and where I've ended up. And my dad and uncle both competed from the 80s to the early 2000s in dirt track speedway, mainly in sprint car racing. And then when I was 7 in 2009, 2010, I got a go-kart for my birthday, my 7th birthday, and from there we progressed through the ranks, and ever since my first drive in a go-kart, really fell in love with the sport.
Everyone started somewhere. So, how did you get your passion for motorsport?
Yeah, look, basically my dad is a big racing enthusiast. And so since the age of about 6, I was always around motorsport, whether it be Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, V8 touring cars. Australian Touring Car Championship was pretty big back then, the old Ford Sierras and all them days, the Peter Brock days. So it's pretty cool. But from about 8 years old, started racing karts. And then from there just progressed slowly into cars. So pretty cool career. So there's always stories. There's always things that you need to put in your head. You need to bank them. As my dad always says, man, do the racing on the track. Do all the talking on the track. Don't do all the talking out of the car. You know what I mean? So keep it zipped up in pit lane. When you get out on the track, do all the talking on the track.
Like all races, you started out somewhere, but I'm guessing you started out in speedway karts. So how old were you when you got into it? And did your family race as well?
Yeah, I started karting, speedway karting, when I was about 8 years old. My sister did it before me. That's how we sort of got into the karting. My dad's been racing V8 dirt modified, sprint cars, about anything you can think of. They were called A-grade hot rods at some point. He's been racing them for about 45 years. But yeah, the old go-karts, Yamaha J's, that's where I got my start. And yeah, I credit a lot of that to where I've gotten to today.
Yeah, 100%. And, does your dad still race, and even your sister?
At the moment they're not, but my sister Ebony, she's going to have a run in the wingless sprint again. I ran her car a couple of times here or there, just sort of keep the cobwebs off it. Dad hasn't raced in probably about 3, or I want to say 4 years, I think. But he keeps telling me he's going to get in it again and give me the flick out of the seat and get him back in it. So we'll see. We'll see how they go this year.
Yeah, that's really cool. I hope your dad can get back in the car at some point. Be good to see him run. It's a pleasure having you on. Normally, I like to ask, what got you into motorsport? So how did it all start for you?
It was all through my dad. He was, grew up or spent his teenage years growing up in New Zealand and lived in the same town as Possum Born. So it was all grew from that. And then he got into co-driving and that sort of thing, and then driving in New South Wales just in an old Gemini when I was really young. So then obviously had to get out of it for kids and family and that sort of thing. And then when I turned 7, started go-karting, and it all kind of snowballed from that.
Yeah, my dad's a big fan of Possum Vaughan. Obviously he's told me that I gotta drive like him out on the rally track. So, but yeah, I'm really great. And what I like to ask most of my guests first is, where did it all begin for you, and how did you first get involved in motorsport?
Well, I was a bit of a late starter, in all honesty. I started racing when I was about 15, so I'm 21 now, so I haven't been racing all that long, but got into racing through mainly my dad, really. He was a big Ford supporter. I'm still a big Ford supporter now, and Bathurst was kind of a ritual in our household, and kind of the neighbourhood I grew up in were all Ford supporters. So kind of our neighbours and our neighbours' all had V8 Falcons and Mustangs, and we all watched Bathurst. So it was kind of with me growing up, and Dad was also really big into bikes and in fast road bikes and stuff like that. So just all that stuff was kind of around me from the word go, and it eventually bit me, and then we started racing. So
Yeah, so you said your dad was a huge Ford supporter. I can definitely relate with my father being a true blue Ford fan. I did watch a bit of Bathurst when I was, when I first sort of can remember. You always used to, you know, get Ford into our head. Ford's the best. So I've had to kind of live with that, and I'm not disappointed. We've had very good teams and drivers in the past couple of years. So we definitely got a good thing going at Ford. I'm great. And first up, can you tell me where you got your passion for motorsport and where did it all start for you?
Well, my dad, he competes in the circuit racing championship down here in his Falcon. So he started off doing drifting when I was around probably 10 or so. So he did that. And then I didn't really have an interest in doing it myself. I used to just go and support him, but I was always the youngest at the track. So I didn't really get to do anything all the big kids did. But we're there. Then he sort of brought me my car and he was like, we can either keep it for you to build or you can sell parts of it. And I was like, oh, I'll give it a crack and start building it. And then I started doing Carner crosses and motor Carners from there.
Yeah, so I guess we all start somewhere. So a lot of drivers do start in sprint karting. When did you get into motorsport?
I started, if you really want to go back, I started when I was 2 when I had my model cars, racing them around the kitchen top. But I first hopped into a go-kart when I was 6 years old. Up at Archerfield Speedway, they had a old go-kart track in the car park, and I used to go around there where I couldn't even stand up because the helmet was so heavy. And that's where I really started and had a few good people around me. Alan Gurr, he used to teach me how to go-kart, and Dad really got me into it. So yeah, pretty much karted all the way from age 6 to about age 12. So yeah, it takes a few years in karting to really get the grips on it. And once you start getting a bit older, then that's when you start looking towards cars.
Normally, I like to ask, what got you into motorsport, and how did it all start?
All right, so I have been very into cars since I was a very young age. So I got my first car when I was 6 years old, and it was a Renault 12, called him Reg Renault, and so that's where I learned to drive manual. But throughout my whole childhood, Dad was always taking us to the racetracks as a race fan and stuff, never did motorsport himself. But it wasn't until we were at the Speedway in my hometown, Maruya, and there was this blue RX-7 there that was racing, and I fell in love with this car. I looked at it and I went, wow, I really want that car. And I would have been about 6 years old at the time, and turns out it was actually one of my dad's mates. So went down into the pits, met the driver, and I started learning a bit about RX-7s and got very, very into rotaries. And it wasn't until I was 14 I started doing motor Carners, and by then I had actually got my own RX-7. I started doing motor Carners just on the dirt in that, and as I got older, I started learning to work on it myself and built it into a race car and started doing track days with my dad when I was 16, and eventually came to stuff like tuning and that I couldn't do on the car. I didn't know how to do it, so brought it up to Canberra and got a gentleman named John Waterhouse to tune it, and he used to build my dad's rotaries. So my dad knew of him for years and years, and he had actually built that blue RX-7 I originally saw at the Speedway. But yeah, so got John to tune it, and I ended up working for John. And through working for John, who is an old rally bloke from way back, I guess you could say, I ended up getting into rally navigating, and then through his connections with Rick Shaw, I got into the RX-8 Cup Series. And so I competed in my first circuit race when I was still 17. So that was super cool.
Talk about how you got into motorsport.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose I would say I'm a grassroots racer in the sense that the way we go about doing our racing is very much traditional in terms of sponsorships and that type of thing. Like, I wouldn't be here without our sponsors. So Dad kind of brought me up with that at a young age. and I started racing karts at about the age of 12. So I actually started karting in an Arrow AX6, which was a senior chassis when it really probably should have been a junior chassis, but we bought that kart so I could grow into it. We didn't really have a lot of money when I was growing up, but I was very fortunate in the fact that my father was quite an accomplished engine builder in the industry and worked in supercars and touring cars and all that sort of thing, even NASCAR as well. So yeah, we had all the know-how there. It was just a matter of bringing the dollars in. So yeah, started in karting and moved my way through.
Yeah, when you were messaging me before, you told me about your father's great story. So would you like to share with everyone a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So Dad started working for a bloke named Peter Malloy, who ran a workshop in Sydney that was basically building all of the factory Ford engines at the time. So Moffat dealer team, and who else were there? I mean, I'm having a mind blank now, but all the big guys back in the 70s. So which was a huge era for motorsport here in Australia. Obviously, it was the part of the Brocky and Dick Johnson beginning eras. So yeah, Dad's been involved for a long time. He helped build John Goss's Formula 5000 and sort of just moved up through the ranks of race teams. Had quite a big accident and rode off a GTHO Phase 3 Falcon that he owned when he was pretty young. So he could never really do racing himself because some of the injuries he sustained sort of wouldn't allow him to get his race license. So yeah, he worked in NASCAR in the late 80s, just before I was born, which is pretty cool story, working for the factory Ford team back then. So yeah, I've been extremely lucky to meet some very good racing drivers over the years and be involved with them, going out to dinner and just being a part of or around while they've got things going on as well. So that was a key part for me.
Let's go back to the start and where did it all begin?
Yeah, look, for me, it was many moons ago. I mean, I'm 38 now, so it's been a long time for me, but I was 9 years old and my old man took me to a hire go-kart track for my birthday. And I guess I did okay. And we went to Newcastle Kart Club pretty soon after and started racing at a club level and did the usual, club level to state level to national level. And then was lucky enough to drive for Tony Kart Factory and race internationally. And my family, my mum, dad, and I decided to go to cars. And that was what led me to Formula Ford.
Well, I look forward to speaking to you tonight, Josh. As I mentioned, you've done some pretty cool stuff in motorsport so far, but where did it all start for you?
I mean, I guess it started like a lot of us in karting. So I was quite late to the party, though. It was the day before my 16th birthday. It was my first go-kart race. So I was very, very late into the piece. Reason was, I mean, as you know, is it's quite an expensive sport. So I struggled to get money to go racing. So when I was probably 12 or 13, I wanted to start, but I was too young to work myself then. So basically from then, I started working with my uncle on weekends. Fast forward a couple of years and the maxed out credit card from my dad, we bought a go-kart, and that's basically where it all started. And yeah, for it to end up here for now is pretty incredible considering.
Yeah, so you started in go-karting. How did you get your passion for racing? Did anything really attract you to the sport?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, my dad used to rally in the 80s in the UK. So one of his claims to fame is he beat Colin McRae in a stage back in the 80s or something like that. So so he was a driver. When we moved out to Australia when I was quite young, he started selling cars, and that was in the era long before your time of sort of VT, VX Commodores, like Scaife became famous for racing, and also Japanese imports like your Skylines, Supras, Silvias, all that sort of stuff, like all those cool cars that are very expensive now. So he would sell them. That was his job, and he'd bring them home as his company cars. So I would basically be in the passenger seat of all these cool things that made sick noises, and I just liked going fast. I didn't really care about racing or anything like that. I just enjoyed going quickly. So as soon as I was old enough to realize how to do it myself, which was karting, that's what I wanted to do. I didn't care about the racing. I just wanted to go fast, and that's effectively where it all started.
Well, first off, where did you get your passion for motorsport?
Passion for motorsport. So my family has been involved in motorsport ever since I was born. My mum races. She races in a Radical SR3. She met my dad through motorsport. They were both in a car club. And then my mum as well, her dad used to own a speedway team back in the 60s and 70s. So she essentially grew up around it as well. So yeah, I guess you can't say I was destined to sort of fall into the sport. So that's where it all kind of came
I
from.
have to ask though, like, what really inspired your passion for motorsport back then, and how did you get started?
I grew up in a motorsport family, so from my very early memories, my dad was a mechanic, and he did sort of tuning on people's cars like MGs and Triumphs and stuff like that, sports cars of the era, of a weekend. And then he prepared several people's race cars in a garage, which was our little suburban house with a garage at the end of the driveway. So I was always surrounded by cars. So I grew up with a love of cars. And in terms of racing, I mean, when I was about 7 or 8, my dad started racing in an MG special. And so we went to the races all the time. There were only probably 6 meetings a year, Simmons Plains and Baskerville in southern Tas. And I just had this thing in my head. I had no mad ambition, but I just wanted to do it. So, when I was old enough, or when you could get a competition license in Tassie or with CAMS, my dad and I went halves in an Elfin Formula V, and it started quite a journey because we eventually formed quite a relationship with Gary Cooper, who you're way too young to know about, but he was Elfin in Australia, and he gave me an opportunity to race outside Tassie, and it was pretty, when I look back on it, it was very special times, but at the time you're just forging ahead, doing your best, so you don't even think about it too much, but I do now. I appreciate it very much.
But where did it all start for you?
For me, it started with Dad and my brothers racing. So Dad was one of the creators of E30 racing. And then, I was 6 or 7, I think, when E30 racing kicked off. And then for me, it was, hanging around at the track, spending time with Dad. I got busy by taking photos of cars. And then when I was able to drive, Dad put me in an E30, and I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, it's very cool. So, did you think that one day you'd grow up racing, BMWs because you were so involved around them?
I think that was always in the back of my mind. Like, it was kind of a follow in Dad's footsteps. My brothers did it too, so it was maybe not much choice there involved. But I'm certainly not complaining.
I'm great, and like I mentioned, I've known you for quite a while now, and we're both used to doing sprint karting a lot of the time at the same tracks. So can you take me back to where you first got the motorsport bug and how it all started?
Yeah, so I think when we first got into karting, I was really young. Dad brought home a kart for I think I was probably 5 when Dad brought home a kart, and just started in a truck yard, just cutting laps. Really fell into love with it, and then through some close friends, they were sprint karting, and then they sort of just got us into it. Started at just club days, so when you could first get your license for sprint karts is at 6. From there, just started at club days, built up from there. That was really, really good just to build up the fundamentals. Then went and competed through like the Golden Power Series and the state championships through the later years.
and then sort of made the change to cars, and from there.
So what inspired you to get involved in grassroots racing?
I was about 4 years old. It's junior speedway and like bike speedway, and I did that for 3 years, just running around when I was 4. Dad had a lot about my age, so and then went to motocross when I was about 7, and then it was a long journey, but then into the speedway.
So from the guess of it, your father inspired you to get into racing?
Yeah, he did. Used to go to all his race meetings and used to just wish I was out there from when I was like 12 and to now I'm actually racing, so it's good.
Intro, but where did your passion for motorsport begin?
So actually both my parents were involved in motorsport, primarily speedway. So I was really born into it. Sort of grew up around racetracks and things, and never really had a chance, I guess. I was born with the disease. Yeah.
So, when you're born into racing, how long did it take for you to get the racing bug?
Oh, like I said, I think, I had it from when I was a little kid. I think when you watch your parents race, you're always looking up to your parents, and I just always knew that I wanted to be in a car. And I think it was probably pretty evident when I did get into the car that I'd sort of, was supposed to be in one. So, but I didn't really start properly like competing until my late teens, just for various reasons. Sort of didn't really get the opportunity to do it.
So I mentioned you have motorsport running through your veins. Coming from a family where your mum and dad were both involved in motorsport, what was it like growing up?
It was pretty hectic. I've been basically nearly every single day of my childhood was at a racetrack in some way, shape, or form. Like Dad ran and managed Wakefield Park for, I think it was 10 years, and then he built, owned, and managed Marulan for another 10 years basically after that. So I've been working at racetracks my whole life as well as driving at them. So it's been unreal.
So when did you decide that you wanted to race?
A little bit later. I sort of I think Dad was trying everything to keep me out of a race car. But I always wanted to go speedway racing. And the plan was to start in junior sedans in New South Wales when I turned 14, which was the age restriction for the category up in New South Wales. So I ended up finding out that the national rule was that you could race junior sedans from 10 years old. So once I found that out when I was like 13, we decided to get a car, and I started racing down in Victoria. I did my first season around the tracks like Warrnambool and Ballarat and Portland Speedway, Simpson, and racing around all those cool Victorian country tracks.
Racing something that your family has always been into, or are you the first generation racer?
No, I was certainly born into it, to say the least. My dad raced speedway for 30 years or so. So I was pretty much born into it. At the moment, I was a couple months old, so I was around the racetracks my whole life, and got involved in go-karting when I was about 9. And it's really just gone from there.
Like I said, you used to dance. So how long did you do that for, and what made you want to pursue motorsport?
So I danced for about 4 years. So when I was younger, I injured my back dancing when I was 8 or 9, and I switched to motorsport because my dad's always loved cars and stuff, and he offered to buy me a drag racer when I was 9. And I don't think that's the most suitable choice for a 9-year-old who's never raced a car before. So he changed his mind to a go-kart instead, and then we started racing that with my little brother. And we did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then I was ready to move up to something else because I was in the gap where I was too light for the bigger category, but I was too old for the younger category in go-karts. And it was kind of like, well, where do we go next? And I was 14, so I was old enough to get my CAMS license. So I got that, and now I'm in my Formula Ford.
Well, firstly, where did you start your passion for motorsport, and where did it all begin?
Okay, so it's a bit of a different story, Myra. So most of the time, people who are in motorsport, their dads are in it, their uncles in it, or something like that. I actually started when I was like 13, 14. I really wanted, the electric cars that kids drive around the street on, just like they're based off Jeeps or whatever, things like that. My local Toys R Us had a Mario Kart version, and I really wanted it so bad. And then my dad said to me, let's just get a real go-kart. So we ended up getting a real kart, and I just used to go to Wollongong and just cut laps. So every Thursday, Dad would pick me up from school and would go down and just do laps into the night. And it was good fun. And yeah, sort of sparked from there. We got into racing and then moved up into cars. So yeah.
So can you share us the story of how you first got involved in motorsport at such a young age?
Yeah, so my dad, he was actually a drag racer, and he set a couple national records. And I sort of was wandering around the pits at drag racing, like, I want a junior dragster and that sort of thing. When can I hop on one of these? And he's like, you know what? How about a go-kart that get way more seat time, can turn corners, all that sort of thing. And yeah, here I am. I've sort of just from there, just put one foot in front of the other and progressed to where I am now in Formula Ford.
And for the viewers who don't know out there, what did your dad race?
So Dad did a bit of everything. He started off Formula Vs, raced Formula Fords. He's tested a few V8 supercars, mini challenge, production sports cars, GT3 cars. He's dabbled in a bit of everything.
So let's get right into it. So how did you get into racing initially?
So my whole family's always been around motorsport. From when I was a little kid, my dad raced motorbikes. And my stepfather from then on raced motorbikes as well. So around motorsport and around track. So I was at Winton as a little kid at race meetings. So always grew up around it. And then through my early, sort of probably 9, 10 years old, 11, 12 years old, I was going to like super tour events at Winton, back in the Audi/BMW days of super tourers and Group A and obviously supercars events. And then my father and uncle started circuit racing. So when I was quite young, sort of 13, when I was 12, I got my junior car cup license. But through that time, I was actually going to race meetings that they were racing at as support and pit crew as I could, but I was too young to race. And then at the age of 12, my uncle gave me my Bendigo Car Club junior license, and which allowed me to do motor carnas, carna crosses and stuff like that until I think back then I was about 15 or 16, I think it was, that I was allowed to start doing circuit sprints. And once I got onto tarmac and off the dirt and doing circuit racing stuff at Calder Park and at Winton, then that was it. I was off.
And I'm guessing Ashton followed his dad's footsteps. So maybe Dave, if you want to start off, and then Ashton can tell me where he's got his inspiration from.
Yeah, for me, it started with my dad before I was born. So I was lucky enough to be bred into motorsport. And that was sports sedans, I believe, for my dad back in the day, then turned into super trucks and went on to doing, I think, a stupid amount of Bathursts in a row, and got to live the life of following Dad around the racetracks. And I've sort of done the same thing with Ashton. He's lived the life of following me around racetracks, probably not as much as I have. We've been a bit more schooling with him, where Dad was always had us in tow at every race. But he's definitely gone to a lot of them, and now he goes to all of them, and he's sort of on a sort of apprenticeship trajectory at the moment. And it's great to have him involved, and even the younger two finally had a steer of a go-kart the other day to learn how to drive more so than anything, and they actually took to it really well, and probably not as much as this guy, but they were keen to actually do more, which was pretty cool to have that next level of involvement from the Cedars racing team, which will be hopefully my son.
Yeah, and Ashton, how did you sort of get inspired to jump into motorsport?
Well, when I was younger, always dad, like when I would go to races, always be supporting him, make sure I have all the team shirts, all his hats, a lot of emotions when he didn't win the race. I can remember that. But even like just watching how whole race team work, like it was just crazy experience. And like, I think when I was for my 6th birthday or something, I got to ride in a what car was it?
I used to work for V8 Race Fast Track.
Yeah,
and
Fast Track. Yep.
yeah, I got to take him out for a hot lap when he was 6 for his birthday. So we did some I think it was 5 laps in the passenger seat with him, like as tight as we could get him, but he was small, so he couldn't really see over the bonnet, but he got to feel the G-force, he got to feel the speed, and he got to do some stuff that was pretty unique for someone at his age, and it's probably the worst thing I have ever done if I wanted to keep my back balance any good. But it was always going to be a case that I was never going to stop my kids from being around my stuff that I've loved myself, because I love it for a reason. So I'm going to share that, and he's taken to it more than the other two, which is fine by me.
So I know you started at quite a young age. What inspired you to get into motorsport?
It'd have to be family, I guess. Like, as I was a kid, I grew up around Dad, and he was always at the track running race cars. So Dad ran a Formula 3 team here in Australia, and yeah, I would have been 5, 6, 7, running around the track with my younger brother. And when I was about 7, Dad got me my first go-kart. So I guess that's how it all started.
Yeah, asked quite often, and a lot of the viewers would know who your dad and grandfather are. Was seeing him involved in motorsport from a young age, did that really spark and start your passion for motorsport?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was fortunate to go to the racetrack for the first time when I was 3 months old. Bathurst in '98 was my first race, and it was pretty special growing up around the racetracks. Obviously, I'm in a fortunate position where I got to see a lot of behind the scenes stuff and really see a lot of different aspects of motorsport, I guess, that people don't get to see very often. Super fortunate to be around that and develop a passion from that from such a young age, and then started in go-karts at 7, and it was finally my turn to have a go, and loved it ever since. So now 24, so just grateful for the cars that I've been able to drive, and looking forward to seeing what the future holds as well.
So when did it all start, and how young were you when you started racing?
My motorsport journey started when I was pretty young. My uncle used to race Oscar and NASCAR back when it was on the Thunderdome, so in the 90s. And he was actually the Oscar champion. And at the same time, my father was sort of racing at state level and knocking around with a few NASCAR teams and supercar teams, just helping out in different various roles. So that was sort of how I got the passion for it at a young age. But then I started go-karts when I was 13. So it took quite a few years of nagging before I got my first kart. But at 13, I started karting down at Oakland.
Yeah. So this other one behind us, mate, is my dad's Austin 7.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting car because this was actually built by a guy named, you may have heard of, Gary Cooper, who built Elfin racing cars.
Oh, right, yeah.
He started building this particular car early days before he was a car manufacturer as a special. Didn't really like it. It's got an Austin 7 engine and gearbox and diff in it. And there was a 750 Formula class back in those days, it was early 50s. He put the car to the side because he wasn't really happy with the engine. He thought he could do something better. So he actually went and built another car on an Austin 7 chassis. It had a Morris engine in it, some later model running gear, some later model brakes. And he built that car and sent it, and they raced that. And then this little car was sitting in the corner, so they just finished it off. And then it got sold off. I'm not sure of its history straight after that, but it ended up with a couple of South Australian guys, David Davidson, and the Schultz brothers raced it for a long time. Then my dad bought it in 1988, and it's been in our family ever since. So,
can you share a bit of your family history and what it was like growing up around boats and engines, being built your whole life?
suppose it's one of those things I haven't been able to escape it. I spent my whole life around this sort of stuff. Like, it comes from my great uncle and my grandfather with their boat business that ultimately spent most of its life out at Lake Eppalock, and where they built boats, engines, various things for racing, and sort of was always exposed to it, and I've always been around it.
So, if I'm correct in saying this, didn't you get a speed record? Your dad, Leo, Keith, and is that it?
No,
right
I
saying
never
that?
got one myself. I've never got a speed record myself. I'm the one missing out. It's actually quite strange because there's the 100 miles per hour badge, and that's quite a thing in powerboat racing to get your 100 miles per hour badge. And my great uncle Keith, I think he was number 12 in Australia,
right,
to get his 100 mile an hour badge. That was in the mid 60s, and the funny thing is, my grandfather actually got his badge at nearly this record speed. But he claims, my grandfather Alan, he claims he was only doing a test run just to get his badge. But turns out he went nearly as quick as the record speed.
And was that
my
all?
father Leo was I think he was at one stage the youngest to get his youngest person to get his 100 mile an hour badge at 17.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, he told me he was 17 years old, and he was the
and
youngest.
His brother Paul's got one as well.
Oh, okay.
Can you share your love for motorsport from when you first started and you were younger?
Ayrton, thank you very much for having me on, mate. First of all, you are absolutely right. It is very rare that I'm in the hot seat having the questions asked of me. And if I'm honest, mate, it's weird because it's not something I often do. It all started for me when I was about, you're a bit older than what I was. I was maybe 18 months old with my parents. They were, and still are, very keen, my dad in particular, very keen on Speedway. So they would take me in Sydney to places like the Sydney Showground Speedway, which is now gone, along with Liverpool and Parramatta Raceway, which are no longer either, very sadly. And I just loved it, mate. I loved the sound, the smell, the atmosphere with the audience and so on. And I was kind of hooked.
You know, if you could go back and talk to your 16-year-old self, what advice would you give?
That's a great question. Great question. Well done. So when I talked to you at the very beginning of this about, working in banking and finance and then having the chance to go off and do some broadcasting and so on. And at the time, both my dad ran a hydraulic company. He was general manager of a hydraulic company with about 60 staff. Right. And my grandfather was in the rag trade or clothing trade. He used to go around the world acquiring cloth for a clothing company. So we would always love the tales that he would have when he would come back from overseas, having been somewhere. So they were both in business, right? And I thought there would be big pressure of sorts on me to do something similar. So when I said that I wanted to get out of banking and finance and go and have a crack at this media thing, which I had never really expressed an interest in high school, I thought they would hit the roof. And they couldn't have been more supportive, right? So I can vividly remember my father telling me, there might be hard yards in this where you're trying to scrape together money and what have you, and going from job to job. And he said, but you have to give this a real, honest, hard-working shot. At least 2 years. See if you can make a crack out of it for 2 years. And at the time, mate, Lee Diffie and I were, and we talk. Diff, as you know, commentates IndyCar and has done some amazing things in America. We're great mates and still are to this day. And we were both climbing that ladder together and doing the hard yards. He was a school teacher before he became a commentator. And the most important thing for both of us, mate, was having a go, backing yourself, giving it a real proper shot. And I'm a huge believer in that. So that would be the thing I would tell myself, not to be afraid, to get out there and have a go. My own kids now, I have teenage kids, and I it probably sounds a bit cliched, but I talk to them about chasing their dream too, mate. I think it's super important, and doing something that your heart is in. You've got to be properly in it and passionate about it. And I would probably tell my 16-year-old self to not be afraid to roll the dice and have a go and chase what you love and chase it with all your might.
So,
yeah.
Let's start where it all began. How did you get into motorsport and why did you start?
Well, I guess I've been riding motorbikes since I was 5 or so. Mum and dad made me start racing go-karts because I just kept on hurting myself, and that was a safer option. So I started racing go-karts, and then that into doing track days at 14. And that led into XLs, and just watching dad's races in the A30s. That was really cool as well. When actually at the track. So that was an experience.
So has your dad only raced E30s, or has he done more racing?
He's just raced E30s. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he races go-karts. He doesn't race, but he just drives them around. That's probably the only other thing that he's done.
Lots of the people I meet have actually spoken to your dad and have had, with such affection. And it's true. Is it true that the first time you drove a car was at Oran Park, and your dad had to pull the pillows out under your seat so you could see over the dash?
Yeah, it was. Obviously, growing up as a kid, Dad had the Advanced and Performance Driving School out at Oran Park for some 27 years, I think, in total. So I kind of grew up at Oran Park as a kid and grew up around cars. And so I think the first time I drove a car at Oran Park, I was like 8 or 9 years of age. So, there was definitely quite a few pillows trying to prop me up and sit me forward, and trying to sort of get just high enough so I could reach the pedals and see over the steering wheel. And I suppose that's where my love affair with cars and driving really started. And obviously with Dad having the business there, I was very fortunate that I had so many opportunities from a very young age to be able to drive cars, obviously in a safe and legal environment.
How did you get involved in motorsport?
Yeah, so motorsport has been one of those things that I've been kind of forced into without knowing. My family, or a lot of my family who grew up as car nuts. My uncle was a drag racer and my dad did up cars in his shed and everything like that. So we really were surrounded around the whole car culture from a really young age. And as you can imagine, when you grow up around those things, you want to follow in your father's and your uncles' and your friends' footsteps. And that's how it landed me to here.
Yeah, that's actually a great. It's more of a different way to start off your motorsport journey, because lots of other people, start in different directions. Some find their own way, kind of like myself. Some people have different routes. So that's a pretty, cool way to get into it. But it also would have been very cool building an EH Holden with your dad. Does he still have the car?
Yeah, so we've actually still got it. Unfortunately, at this stage, it is in storage because my racing and my business has taken more of my focus at the moment. And every time I want to bring it out for a restoration, I quickly shove it back into the storage shed again for that. But no, there's classic Holdens have been a bit of a love in the family, and especially mine as well. I've owned a few over the years. They're starting to get so expensive where I don't think I can afford them anymore. So we've got a few good plans for this EH Holden. We're hoping by maybe the end of race season next year that I can pull it out of the shed. I've got plenty of parts ready for it. It's all a case of bolting them on at the moment.
But yeah, I also do have similar experiences. With my dad, he's grown up helping me build my race car, and I've helped work on, some cars that he, has to maintenance or needs things to do on. He's taught me how to do it. So I have a similar experience.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
So was it something that your father or your mum was really into and then you sort of picked up, or just being so close to Bathurst, it was something that, always appealed to you?
Well, my stepdad raced Aussie cars for a number of years. So I was always, and he used to race go-karts back, in the late 90s and early 2000s. So yeah, he was always, a big part of that for me. But I was into racing, a lot before, when my mum was single. So
I was playing with the toy with the 164 scale V8 supercars when I was 2 or 3 years old. So I was certainly already a fan. Then yeah, he definitely made a big impact on me for sure. When my stepdad was going to sell the Aussie car, he said, "Do you want to have a drive?" And of course, I said yes. He said it was $1,000 for a test day, so I paid him $1,000 and got a drive, and I done a Wakefield, and yeah, I felt like he thought I did better than what maybe he thought I would do. And then yeah, he decided not to sell the car. So that's a pretty very easily could have been all over for me. Very
Normally
lucky.
I'd ask how it all began. So where did it start for you in motorsport?
Where did it start for me? I didn't really have a choice. I was born into a motor racing family. I grew up with it around, with my dad being a professional, quite a successful driver, growing up around that. And there was nothing else that I wanted to do. So, grew up never did any go-karting. Just sort of had to forge my little path. And the guy that really I owe it to and giving me an opportunity to first race a car was Paul Morris. So I was working at Norwell, one of my first jobs up there, and eventually convinced him to give us a go and a drive in one of his speedway cars on the terms and the conditions that if I broke it, I had to fix it. And I learned a lot about myself and what you put into competition and respect to your fellow competitors. So I learned a bunch about the sport, and started off in the speedway in a little dwarf car. So learnt heaps there about what you put in yourself.
And you said you grew up around the racetrack a lot. So do you have any favorite memories from watching your uncle, for an example?
I do. It was when I was a bit older, when I was 14. My grandma and grandfather took me up to Bathurst, and that was in 2018. And it was just me out of my family that went up, and I was lucky enough. My auntie and Priya and my cousin Clay let me sit in the garage with the 888 team, and Uncle Steve and Craig Lowndes ended up winning that year. So that was a pretty good memory because got to actually experience it with the team and stuff. So that's probably my favorite memory.
And obviously it's a cheap category and stuff like that. It's also, the cars are quite simple, so it'd be sort of, in a way, for those who are mechanically minded, it'd be quite easy to work on.
Yeah, me and Dad just in the garage just tinkered away and built it. We obviously had a lot of help through contacts and stuff from Grandpa and my uncle, so that helped a lot. But yeah, it was just me and Dad tinkering away in the garage.
Who's been your biggest supporter and helps motivate to keep you going?
That's tough. I can't really narrow it down to one person. It's obviously my family, like, so supportive. Dad's always keen to work on the car and always help out wherever he can, and Mum's really supportive just for me, and really good to have just before a race meeting and always making sure I'm all right. And my sister and her boyfriend are really good, and my brother, he loves getting on the headset and trying to help out and try to get involved. So any of them, and then like literally anyone who's just helps out or sends a message, I just want to try to get some results for them so I can give back.